Chris is VP Security Engineering and CISO at JIT with over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity. Chris is focused on cloud security, security program development, security strategy, assessment and management of cyber risk. Please give it up for Chris.
All right, B-Sides Albuquerque, good to be back for year 2. Awesome to see everybody. Last year was a great start. Had a lot of fun last year, and this year seems to be even better. Some great talks. Just to kind of get rolling, I think we're like 4 or 5 talks in today. I haven't heard anyone bring up the CrowdStrike issue. Maybe for the best, we kind of let all the dust settle. But my talk today is about tools, and with the issue that's still ongoing, I'm just curious, just kind of a show of hands, how many people like their job function were impacted or are impacted by the CrowdStrike issue? Just by show of hands. So okay, got a few. How about just your daily interaction? Like yesterday, you just noticed it, like an issue, it caused an issue, like you're out traveling, or doing something, buying something, purchasing something. We'll show of hands. Anybody else kind of? Not a whole lot. That's kind of surprising. I live in Dallas, Texas, so I flew in yesterday and got a little bit delayed because of the flight issues. And then maybe you can grab a bite to eat at the airport, Chick-fil-A, and they actually had a sign up that said, "Hey, we're opening late because of technical issues." I'm like, wow, this is really real. This is impacting a lot of things in a lot of different ways. Also, when I checked into the hotel, they had to go the old school way. They couldn't use the credit card. They had to write it down. So really impacting. And I bring that up because I'm going to talk about application security today, not about endpoint. The CrowdStrike issue. But one thing that I wanted to kind of bring up is, like, you think about this. This is going to play out, right? There's obviously the issue just happened, and there'll be a lot of we don't know all the details about what happened. A lot's already come out if you've been reading it, tracking it. But what's the big impact from a cybersecurity perspective that we're going to see coming out of this? And who's the big winner here? And my concern is that the bad actors. This is a big deal because obviously the CrowdStrike issue impacted the availability of so many services out there. So now when you go through and look at, again, time back to my talk here, we'll get into tools here in just a minute. The scrutiny around tools is going to be that much more intense in our companies. If you're a consultant with your clients, used to be hey, we pick a security tool, here's all the reasons and justifications. Now the whole kind of is this going to potentially impact our availability? We should always be part of a tool selection process, but I think now it's going to be even more impacted. My concern is that are some of these endpoint solutions that are really important. Because if you look at a lot of the latest breaches that have come out, malware infected on endpoint. I mean, come on, that's like 75% of the latest breaches these days, right? It's a very common attack vector. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I just wanted to bring that up, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of conversations. We'll talk with you about kind of where we see this all going and the impact. So just a little bit of an aside before we get started here. My talk today is about application security. And actually, another impact from the CrowdStrike issue. You see 2 people up on the screen here. So I'm Chris Koehnecke. I mentioned I live in Dallas, flew in from Texas yesterday. I've got a close friend, Matt Rowland. He lives up in Boise, Idaho. He works for United Airlines. He was going to come down, and his flight was canceled, delayed, so he couldn't make it today. So we don't really get this talk together as as a duo, but today it'll just be me. So again, another impact from the issue, CrowdStrike issue. All right, so maybe just quick introduction, just a little bit more about myself. So I've been in consulting for quite some time. So I started my career in system administration, kind of the way a lot of us do, right? Hands on keyboard. I love that with AT&T for a handful of years. And moved into consulting. I really wanted to help people, help companies, problem solve, and work on different types of projects. So I joined KPMG, Big Four, almost 20 years ago. So I got in, actually quite fortunate, I got in early, so I got to work on all kinds of different types of projects, business continuity, disaster recovery, security operations, penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, all of the above. So that was a really cool experience for me. One of my clients actually built a startup all around application security, and this one thing I noticed as a consultant is that we had a lot of great projects, a lot of great outcomes, but I wasn't seeing a lot of the processes and tools that we had picked for clients kind of stick, and then different regimes change. How can we really build products that are meant for developers and can kind of stick with a product? So I joined a startup called JIT.io, which is focused on empowering developers with security. And I actually just recently moved on and actually going back into consulting. So this goes to show in cybersecurity, your career can take you a lot of different ways. The key is to keep your ears open and your eyes open, right? It's a lot of opportunities out there. Outside of work, love to hike, love the outdoors, so that's why I love coming out here, beautiful up in the Sandia Mountains. I didn't get a chance to go for a hike yesterday because I was delayed, but always love doing that. I like great golf courses out here too. So love spending time in the outdoors and traveling. And actually, that's where the genesis for this talk came from, traveling, because in my consulting days, I used to love that too. Getting back into it, travel, see different parts of the country, get all these different experiences, working with different companies. That's a lot of fun. And then Matt working for United and being a director of application security. Like, hey, let's build a talk around application security. Well, let's, since our passion, one of our key passions is around travel, let's do a bit of an analysis and an analogy around flying a plane. Because, quite frankly, cybersecurity and application security is pretty dang complex, and so is flying a plane. So we thought it would be a good analogy to kind of break it down. So apologies for the rendering a little messed up here on the slide, but so I'll jump into the kind of introduction and overview about application security. Spend a little bit of time on that. And then I mentioned this is about tools, right? Which is why I was able to bring up the CrowdStrike thing. But the application security tools. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about tools for prevention in terms of your tool set and your suite of tools from an AppSec perspective. And then also we're going to get into tools for protection as well. And then at the end, I'll just kind of tie it all together, like operationalizing what this kind of a best practice looks like in terms of an application security program, looking at your tool set and how it's deployed. Maybe just a quick show of hands before I jump any further. I'm curious, my AppSec people, how many people here work with AppSec on a regular basis? Securing applications, managing an application portfolio, just a show of hands. Okay, we got a few. Maybe a few more penetration testers or more kind of deeper technical people in the room today, but this should be good though. This will be good, kind of helping you better understand what are some of the key tools to think about in terms of an application security program. All right, so when we get into, of course, you got to start with the why, right? Why is application security? Well, why is the application security program important? And there's a lot of reasons why it's important. If you go to the OWASP top 10, and there's a lot of great material that OWASP has. When Matt and I were putting this deck and this talk together, we had a few things that kind of jumped to the top of the list for us. One is that if you look at it from an AppSec perspective, in particular if you're talking about software companies where they're delivering, their core product is their software applications. So you think about like all the rideshare applications, you think about Amazon and shopping, and it's across the board, right? There's so many SaaS applications, everything's out there. There'll be more and more. if you look at it from an AppSec perspective, it's that first line of defense, right? How are you protecting your application, keeping bad actors out, protecting your data across all your development stages. So it really becomes, in particular for those companies, and I love the last talk talking about, think about your threat actors, and if you think about your risk assessment for a company, if you're a SaaS company, your application is super important. I have to say, it's not important for other companies that aren't SaaS companies, maybe it's a little bit less important, but for those companies where, hey, your web application is your core business, your AppSec program is your first line of defense. So super important. The second one up here might be a little bit surprising if you think about cybersecurity, but I personally put this up here, particularly with my journey, is about development velocity, because if you think about the application security tools out there, we'll talk about those today. From a cybersecurity perspective, again, we're really focused on protecting data, keeping bad actors out, making sure the application is kept up to date, making sure availability, again, the application is up and running and not impacting our business operations. That's all super important. But if you look at modern SaaS companies today, and I'm sure many of you out there, there's releases happening, changes happening all the time with these applications. There could be multiple releases per day, right? In some cases, more modern ones, dozens up to 100 releases a day. You don't want to slow that. As a cybersecurity professional, and this is part of my learning from a consultant perspective. Of course, security is super important. But you got to think about the business, and that development velocity piece is super important. That you pick the right tools, and as part of your AppSec program, ultimately, as you're driving through the process, that your developers are enabled, they use the tools, they like the tools, and it's not slowing down that release process for your application. And then the third one up here is regulations and compliance, and this is where I spent a lot of time in consulting. But AppSec is a big part. Are you running the appropriate scans? Are you protecting your data? Can you show that? You think about some of the standards out there like SOC 2 and ISO, and you get into things like FedRAMP. Application security is a very big part of that compliance piece. So by having a strong application security program, you're also going to meet a lot of those regulations and a lot of compliance things you have to do anyway. All right, so hopefully it helps with just the reasons why you have an AppSec program. Now, again, I'm talking about tools today, but it's very important to know that that's not the only thing that's part of this story from an application security perspective. What else is new? People, process, technology, right? But looking at this, it is super important, and again, Matt and I have separate talks for each one of these different categories or program pillars, right? But their team, your AppSec team, the roles, responsibilities, skill sets, who's doing what, that's a super important piece that's part of AppSec. Also looking at your processes or how you're carrying out, different your standards, your policies, making sure your data is appropriately protected. What are those processes behind it, and your standardized set of processes? That's a really important piece too. But kind of that fun stuff to talk about is tools, right? So we're gonna get into tools today. But one thing I will urge you is never start with tools. It's always good to have your processes set up for your AppSec program, what your team looks like. Prior to selecting those tools, also understanding what's your risk posture, your risk assessment, it can help drive that your tool selection. But just to give it, there is more than tools, as I think we all know. All right, so I talked a bit about Matt and I having this passion for traveling and think about how airline travel, how it's changed our lives. And again, it's very complicated. I'm not a pilot, nor do I pretend to be. I've been on plenty of flights. But if you think through what a pilot goes through and what a team goes through, right? A flight team that goes through when they're taking that flight. There's a lot of things that are part of that, right? And we thought this was a really good analogy to go through. So just kind of run through this. We call it the flight deck, right? And how do we compare an AppSec program to operations for an airline? So first piece gets into the pre-flight checklist. Like, what does the pilot do? Gets in the cockpit before he gets in the cockpit. Before they get on the plane, they go through their pre-flight checklist, all things they have to do. So this is where we compare this to static code analysis, right? I'll talk about this in SaaS. which gets into checking your code for vulnerabilities and issues, kind of making sure that's all set up appropriately. Next, which has gotten a lot of publicity with this, of course, the SolarWinds breach we talked about a lot about last year at B-Sides ABQ, but making sure that you got your supply chain appropriately set up. We kind of thought about this as like the fuel gauges, right? Do we have the right amount of fuel for the flight? Is it, are we going to get where we need to go? Is that all, the appropriate fuel? Is that all, what we need? So that's when we get the software composition analysis, or SCA. This is another piece for AppSec. Next gets into, when you're getting ready, the flight's going to take off and thinking about the flight plan, you got to understand what's the weather out there, right? Do we need to avoid any storms, any issues? So as we thought about what are kind of the external pieces there, and that's when we got to DAST, or Dynamic Application Security Testing. What does the external environment look like, right, from for our web application? How do we manage that? Next gets into, again, think about the pilot, inside the cockpit, and all kind of the interactions are happening with the pilot, the co-pilot, the team inside the cockpit. This is where we get into the IAST, or interactive application security testing. This is more like the details of what's happening actually within the application, which can be really important. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Then we get into actually kind of flying the plane, and where the pilots spend most of their time, of course, is on taking off and landing. But it's very important they turn on the automatic pilot to get them from point A to point B. So this is where we get into runtime application security protection. And again, this is more of a tool for protection that I'll talk about here in a little bit. And then last is that kind of course, super important since 9/11 is to kind of have that line, right, that no one can pass on a plane. As they're going in, only one person can be up near the cockpit door. So that web application firewall, or WAF, right? Kind of feel like that was a good way to analogy for what a web application firewall is. So this is something that, again, kind of like this is thinking in terms of how you explain a web application program, what that looks like, and if you're a flight geek like I am, it's a good way to be able to kind of characterize or explain what it should look like and what you're going to think through. Of course, I urge you to perform a risk assessment, right, and get into the details, but a good way to kind of explain what we need. We think this slide does a good job of telling that story. All right, so let's get to the actual tools now, and I'm going to start with the tools for prevention. So I talked about that that pre-flight checklist, right, and static code analysis testing. So what is static code analysis testing? And I think a lot of you are probably familiar with it. And it's actually super important. You think about that pre-flight checklist that the pilot's going through and looking through all those different things. Your code and the quality of your code is super important as part of your web application. It's the core of your web application. So you want to run the appropriate scans to check for, of course, vulnerabilities, as well as what's called code smells, issues with the code, poorly written code. Again, I think some of the stuff's going to come out with CrowdStrike. Maybe they had some issues with their code. We'll see how that all comes out. But static code analysis testing can help in all these different ways as you're developing your application. So vulnerability, and again, it's not just vulnerabilities, right? It's also code issues. Now, what a common problem that we see with static code analysis testing, and I'm most familiar with, I've been using SemRep because I've heard that static code analysis testing tool. But there's a lot of tools out there that do static code analysis, open source and commercial tools. But it's one of the key things about static code analysis testing is that it comes back with a lot of vulnerabilities and issues typically, right? And quite frankly, a lot of teams tend to ignore this thing. It might be a check the box thing, like, hey, we're on GitHub or GitLab. We use some out of the box static code analysis checking. It checks for code issues. We think most of them are false positives. It kind of goes into a backlog, or it might go into a security team discussion. That's one of the biggest challenges with static code analysis, is making sure that you got the appropriate security efficacy, right? Real issues and risks are being detected by this. So one of the things that we've learned at JIT, and Matt and I have talked a lot about, is that the process for handling the results from static code analysis testing. So a couple things to think about, right? One is these automated code reviews. use. So how are you embedding static code analysis testing into your development processes? So there's a lot of tools and platforms out there that help you do this, but I think times have changed from maybe 10 years ago. As a security professional, I would pick the SaaS tool, right? I would run the SaaS scans against my company's code base, my client's code base, come back with all these results, oh my God, all these highs. Really hard to kind of read through and understand as a security professional, so I have to go back and talk to the development teams and engineers. A lot of friction, right? A lot of meetings, a lot of challenges around handling those results from the static code analysis testing. So one of the things that we're doing now, which I think is working much better, is we're bringing a couple things. One is we're bringing those results, those static code analysis testing results, directly into the development processes. So like if you're using a modern source code management system like a GitHub or a GitLab or a Bitbucket, right? For every single pull request, every single change that's happening, run your static code analysis scans against that change and then bring those results directly to the developers and give them suggestions on how to fix. That's way better than the old way that I talked about of running the scans myself, the security team, and then we're like, this is a high, it's not, bringing those results directly to the developers and then giving them suggestions on how to fix. Way better way to secure your code and also have better quality code as well. The other thing is, I talked about SaaS is notorious for a lot of false positives. Maybe it's something that's ranking high, it's not really high, like the risk ranking can be an issue. So the piece there that we look at is what's the context, right? So if you can have some additional context engine that can help you better understand, hey, these static code analysis scan results on our code base were detected, these are the real issues, these are the ones we need to go fix. It could make a really big difference and have a really big impact and help you with that development velocity as well. The only other thing I'll say about SAST is that I also include that as secrets detection, right? So there's a lot of tools out there, if you're familiar with like Truffle Hog or Git Leaks, a lot of the SaaS tools, they have like embedded secrets detection. That's a really big one, right? Because if you look at your code base, it's very common, and again, I'm not a developer, I'm not gonna point fingers at developers, but it's pretty easy to inadvertently have secrets within your code, right? Whether it's something that happened between testing and like a testing phase that gets into your production, it can happen. So that's one where typically, hey, we don't have a lot of arguments around, hey, we found a secret, real secrets, we have to go fix that. But that's a super important piece there in terms of having clean code and having code that fewer vulnerabilities and issues and exploits that attackers can exploit. Getting those secrets out of your code early in the process is super important. So that's static code analysis testing. Next gets into the software composition analysis, and again talked about this being kind of like a fuel, right? The fuel gauge, making sure you're getting the appropriate fuel for the plane. The plane's going to run as expected. So these are all the software components that are part of your web application. The web application needs to be able to run. And these are open source components. This is, again, gotten a lot of press because of the SolarWinds breach and the Microsoft breach. There's been quite a few high profile ones. So there's a lot of tools out there that can help you with this in terms of making sure that you've got your software libraries, it's very clear about everything that we're running in our environment, right? So what are all the different software libraries that are actually in our environment, and are we keeping them up to date as well? So this gets into what's called SBOM, right, or software bill of materials, and that's really a leading practice now. And it's for compliance. And those of you that have had to create software bill of materials or SBOMs, they're like, yeah, we have to do this. It's a compliance thing, but it can really help you because it's a way for you to manage and maintain and make sure, hey, we know all this with inventory, right? We know all the software libraries that are out there within our environment. We have the current versions. It can help us track to make sure that everything is up to date. We know what is out of date. So that's a super important piece there. From a software composition analysis perspective, making sure it's all up to date. Up next is again talking about weather radar when the plane takes off and making sure we're avoiding any storms or issues. This is into dynamic application security testing, so this is detecting vulnerabilities actually in your web application APIs while they're running. So you think about this like dynamic application security testing and running these scans. Typically, it's hey, your application is out in the wild, because I talked about how the ultimately the security for your code and making sure all the software libraries are up to date. You want to make sure that when you're actually running, you may have missed things or new issues may have come up. So running those DAS scans and looking at tools like there's tools out there like actually there's a ton of tools, but Burp Suite is probably the most famous and popular one that people have utilized. We use Zap and open source and JIT, for example. So there's a lot of tools out there, but running on a regular basis those DAS scans, and it could be I'd say daily. You could run a daily scan, authenticated is preferred on your web application. See if there's any of those issues out there that we may have missed during development processes. That's super important. All right, so time has flown by. So I've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to kind of cruise through here a little bit. I'll touch on this just really quickly. IaaS, interactive application security testing. Actually, Matt brought this up to me. It's a bit newer. It combines SaaS and DAS, and it can help you to get more higher fidelity findings. I personally haven't used this, but I don't know if anybody else has. I'd love to talk to you about the experiences you have of positive things about IaaS or negative things through IaaS. So again, the tools, and talk about this of making sure that you pick the right tools. What are some of the selection criteria for those tools? So you think about open source versus commercial. There's a lot of great open source tools out there, right? So I highly recommend take a look at that, right? So what open source tools are free? I mentioned like SetRep for SaaS. Of course, they have a paid version now because they've gotten so popular. But there's a free version. It's pretty great. So and there's a lot of other ones out there too. You want to make sure all your languages are covered when you pick the tools. That's a super important thing. If you have a certain framework that you need to follow from a compliance perspective, that's really important too. The last thing I'll say about tool selection is that make this a team involvement. What I mean by that is like we're cybersecurity professionals. We take this super seriously. It's our job. A lot of times maybe we take that too far because we pick the tool, we implement the tool, we bring our development team in particular for a tool like a SaaS tool. It's going to be brought into development processes. So bring in your developers where they get some skin in the game. We'll highly recommend that as part of your tool selection process. Tools for protection. I'm just going to jump through this. RAS is runtime application security protection, and WAF, web application firewalls. Again, these tools could potentially break your application. And again, this is the cross-track issue from yesterday. Make sure they're configured appropriately. But if you have a higher risk tolerance, if your company does, if your consultant, your client has a higher risk tolerance, these could be really good tools to look at as well as part of your application security program. If you want to make sure you know everything that's happening, in particular with RAS, that's happening within your application. And here's just a quick view of WAF is on the outside and RAS is actually inside your application or inside your environment. All right, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. One thing I'll say is like that operational view of when to run these different tools. I like this slide a lot because you think about pre-commit, so developers they're creating the application, they're in their local ID on their local laptop. That's where you could run things like SAST and SCA. Then you get into the commit phase, and then you run additional SAST and SCA. And then once you get into testing, you can start running your DAS scans. And then actually the deployment, that's where some of those tools of protection can come into place as well. But we want to only get this view. All right, well with that said, I'll wrap it up. Open to any questions. And again, thanks B-Sides Albuquerque for bringing back for year 2. Awesome turnout. And it's been a lot of fun.
Well, if there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and roll to the next presentation.